It was a revolution the world didn't see coming. An uprising that set off a chain reaction across North Africa and the Middle East. The Arab Spring was born in Tunisia, a revolt against repression inspired by an act of desperation and defiance. The actions of this man, a vegetable seller, Mohamed Bouazizi, forced the most powerful man in the country to flee. Zine Abidine Ben Ali, who ruled for more than 2 decades, brought down by anger and protest. The demands for political change were echoed in other countries. Protests in Egypt, a descent into violence in Libya, chaos and bloodshed in Syria and elsewhere. If the Arab Spring taught us anything, it is that there is no one easy way to remove a regime. And even when a revolution is considered successful, securing the ideals of that revolution can be even more difficult.
Tunisia is the only success story of the so-called Arab Spring, but at the same time it is in an incredibly unstable region.
There are still risks for the revolution not to succeed, that the battle is still long.
Actually, I'm afraid we are going back to a police state.
Tunisia has been widely praised. The country has been largely stable. Democratic elections, a new constitution, and a coalition government are held up as proof of progress. 4 Tunisian organisations even won the Nobel Peace Prize. But the country's economy is struggling. 3 major terror attacks have threatened stability. 5 years after Tunisia's revolution, hopes remain unfulfilled. There are again riots on the streets, the biggest protests since the uprising. For many, optimism has turned to disillusion and anger. Revolution Day. 5 years since the autocrat Zine Abidine Ben Ali escaped from the country. These Tunisians are proud of their revolution, a revolution that happened after thousands of people packed the streets of the capital to demand change. Back then, police snipers were ordered to shoot protesters. These days, people queue up to have their pictures taken with Tunisian special forces. It may be a photo op, but as an example of how far this country has come, it's an effective one.
The faces, in the eyes of the people, in their smiles, there is lots of optimism and lots of love to continue life in this after dictatorship.
Not everyone is satisfied though. Unemployment soared after the revolution. Many people don't trust Tunisia's new democratic leaders. And yet under Ben Ali, a public protest like this, calling for more jobs, would have been unthinkable. Tunisians can also now freely broadcast without being afraid. Criticism of the government is now common. The explosion in the number of radio and television companies, a reflection of Tunisia's infant democracy. The media here has opened up, no longer repressed, but still far from happy with the situation.
When Ben Ali is in power, we haven't the power.
When we sang before, there was a lot of problems and taboos. But after the revolution, we found freedom of speech, so we can express ourselves. We talk about everything we want.
On a trouvé l'expression.
For a long time, Tunisians couldn't talk about what they wanted. For most of its independence, the country has had only 2 leaders. President Habib Bourguiba, an autocrat but relative moderate, did a lot to improve women's rights, outlawing polygamy and establishing a minimum age for marriage. But in 1987, with Bourguiba's health failing, his new Prime Minister, Zine Abidine Ben Ali, seized power. Doctors declared Bourguiba too senile and ill to rule, and Ben Ali took his place in a bloodless coup. Despite pledges for democratic change, the country moved in the opposite direction. In a world of tapped phones and secret police, thousands of dissidents were either jailed or forced into exile. For the next 23 years, Ben Ali would rule alone. Any dissent would be crushed. Modern-day Tunisia is undoubtedly a different place. In the 5 years since Ben Ali fell, political discussion has flourished. This generation has been able to vote in largely fair elections, and power has shifted between the main political forces. A new constitution enshrined women's and religious rights, and a coalition government survives despite increasing parliamentary squabbles. The new president, Beji Essebsi, promises to meet the demands of the people, but the optimism of those early revolutionary days has faded. High expectations remain unfulfilled. And last year, 3 major terror attacks shook the country. The massacre at Sousse. Holidaymakers gunned down on the shores of the Mediterranean. In June last year, 38 people, mainly British tourists, were shot dead on the beach. The gunman had hidden an assault rifle inside a beach umbrella before opening fire. Saifuddin Rezgeh had been trained in Libya and is said to have been inspired by Daesh, also known as ISIS. The sense of peace here now is unsettling, knowing the violence that was unleashed that day. The beach almost deserted, apart from a few fishermen. Nearly 70 hotels here, normally open in the winter, have shut their doors as guests stay away.
The hotels were fully booked. It was hard to get flights, it was hard to get hotels in the summertime when you haven't pre-booked. Now, the hotels are closed, only a few hotels are open and they're not fully booked. It's really, really sad, yeah.
It's more than 6 months since the attacks and the ramifications are still being felt. This holiday paradise is now off limits for many tourists. The British Foreign Office, after the attacks, warned against all but essential travel to Sousse and the rest of the country. British officials say more attacks are highly likely.
The government insists security is its top priority.
They give the terrorists what they want. I understand the reaction of the British, but it's the Tunisian people who pay the price. After the warning from Britain, almost all tourists stopped coming here. The number one priority of our government is security. And stability is also important because it's essential to restarting the economy and to encourage tourists to come again.
Images of terror, of tourists being targeted on holiday, haunt this country. In March last year, gunmen linked to Daesh attacked the Bardo Museum in Tunis and shot dead more than 20 people. Then in November, 12 people were murdered in the heart of the capital. A suicide bomber targeted a bus carrying the presidential guard. As people mourned the dead, tighter security measures were brought in. A state of emergency was declared across Tunisia, an overnight curfew imposed in the capital. The state of emergency remains in place. The Tunisian army has sporadically fought with militants in more remote parts of the country, and hundreds of people have been rounded up in anti-terror operations over the last few months. After the revolution, there was a general loosening of control by the state. Radicals, previously in prison, were released, and the wars in Libya and Syria gave militants renewed purpose.
Of course, after the revolution, there was almost no security for a first year or two. So there was a problem with Salafism and radical groups. I think that is under control now. But the root causes of radicalization are still there. Poverty, unemployment. When you have young people who are losing hope that they have a future in this country or they can have a dignified life.
It's estimated as many as 6,000 Tunisians have joined the Syrian war. In this Daesh propaganda video, the group threatens Tunisia.
We are coming at you with car bombs. We are coming to you with Kalashnikovs.
People here fear men like this will come to Tunisia to launch attacks. Travelling through Tunisia's rural towns, signs of economic neglect are everywhere. This is a country where for many their hopes for the future have turned into hopelessness.
We've just had another phone call from the tourist police. It's actually the 8th phone call we've had this morning already, and they know we're going to Ben Gardan, and they say they're going to meet us here. They want to speak to us.
This is Ben Gardan, a worn-out town on the Libyan border known for smuggling. Something the authorities don't like advertised. These makeshift stalls are home to illicit money dealers, processing cash from Libya, Algeria and elsewhere. Some are also middlemen in the smuggling trade. We came to Ben Gardan though because it's one of the main suppliers of fighters to Syria, a small town that's become known as a hub for Daesh recruitment.
It's been for a long time something of a hotbed of radicalization. I mean, back in 2006, al-Zarqawi, the then head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which would later turn into Islamic State, said something like, if only this town was near Fallujah, then we could liberate all of Iraq tomorrow.
People in the mosques here have, in the past, been accused of radicalizing men to fight. The town suffers from high unemployment, and it's not far from Libya and Daesh training camps. But one imam insists fewer people are leaving.
To be honest, I think young people had no knowledge. There was no education. And after the revolution, there was chaos everywhere. So everyone had their own way of thinking. But now, things are slowly getting better. So young people are staying here.
Do you know people who have gone to fight in Syria or Libya?
No. Not from here. From somewhere else. I have to go and pray now.
The number of parents losing their children to radicalization continues to grow. Mohammed's son, Masood, travelled to Syria more than 3 years ago. He was 24 and was talked into going, his father says, after he went to Libya to find work.
He's a young man. He didn't know any better. The militias in Libya may have talked him into it. Only God knows what happened. They may have sold him for money. We don't know.
Mohammed says his son was captured by Bashar al-Assad's forces.
He is held in a prison in Damascus. A human rights group met him and other prisoners. I couldn't go because I couldn't afford it.
Like other parents, his appeals for his child to come home have so far failed. Away from the mosque, the police were keeping a close watch. Every day while travelling across Tunisia, the authorities would check up on what we were doing. In Ben Gardan, we kept filming as we were taken to the police station and detained, questioned for 30 minutes about who we were speaking to. Less than an hour after being released, we were stopped again, this time by the military police, checking over our paperwork. Tunisia's media may be freer, but the authorities are still distrustful, and press freedom certainly doesn't feel particularly free. The more we travelled through the country, the more we heard the same thing. There has been change, but nowhere near enough. Tunisia's new government has promised to respect civil liberties, but the judiciary and police are still accused of human rights violations. Under new anti-terror laws, suspects can be held in jail for 2 weeks without access to a lawyer. Amnesty International reports that torture and beatings still occur and people continue to die in police custody.
The times I've been beaten by the police after the revolution are more numerous than before. The cases of torture and the suspected deaths in custody and police stations rose lately during the last month. We feel that there is a regression.
Lina Ben Maheni is a human rights activist who's protested against police brutality. She's also repeatedly been threatened and now, ironically, lives under police protection.
There are people who are working seriously to protect the country from terrorism, but there are people who are trying to recover the power they had in the past, using the pretext of the fight against terrorism. When we see what is happening in the Tunisian media today, well, I'm afraid we are going back to a police state.
It was never going to be easy to immediately end the brutality of the Ben Ali years. He may have fled, but the systems he cultivated are deeply embedded. Five years since the revolution, Tunisians are reflecting on what's been achieved. The uprising began after this man, Mohamed Bouazizi, killed himself in the small city of Sidi Bouzid. Police had confiscated the vegetable seller's equipment. In frustration, he doused himself in petrol and set himself alight, leading to huge protests. His cousin shows me the spot where Mohamed set himself on fire outside the governor's office.
When he poured the fuel, he set himself on fire like this, and it burned his neck and his jacket, and he started to run.
Mohamed's vegetable cart is now cast in stone as a permanent memorial. One of the country's poorest had changed the course of Tunisia's history. But Mohamed's cousin doesn't believe enough has changed.
The people regret the revolution because, even more than before, the dictator is back. This government uses terrorism. Every time we ask for some rights, they say they must fight terrorism first.
Do you personally regret the revolution now? Do you feel that Mohamed Bouazizi, your cousin, he died in vain?
Yes, because some of those in power with Ben Ali are back. They still rule the country. Everyone is thinking for themselves. No one wants to help the country.
That sense of the country not moving forward is felt most strongly in the countryside. Time and again, people in Tunisia's rural communities said they felt forgotten. Under Ben Ali, economic policies always benefited a few and excluded the majority. And that economic system hasn't changed much since the revolution. The desert landscape of Matmata has always felt another world away. Perhaps explaining why director George Lucas used some of these traditional Berber dwellings to film some of the Star Wars films. Luke Skywalker's family home was created here in the 1970s, a draw for visitors for decades. It's not doing so well now.
Tourism, it's really hard now. Almost no people come here. On average, 1 or 2 international tourists visit a week. It's catastrophic.
The hotel turned movie set has long traded on its Star Wars connections, but the possibility of terror attacks has caused tourist numbers to plummet.
This place, in fact, this whole town, is largely dependent on tourism. The hotels, the restaurants, the tour guides, they've all based themselves here and developed over the decades because of the Star Wars films. But international tourists are no longer coming, and there's no sign of them returning.
Towns like this across Tunisia face the same challenge: unemployment. They have freedom and peace, but no work. Most of these men are resentful of the revolution and hark back to the days of the dictator.
Ben Ali.
The economic grievances that inspired the uprising against Ben Ali remain unresolved, and some are so aggrieved by the lack of progress they want Ben Ali back.
Voilà. Est-ce que c'est?
C'est Ben Ali.
Ben Ali.
Look what I've written on the picture. Ben Ali is the president of our poorest people, and he will be forever our president.
I ask him why he has the picture.
Because he was a good president for all Tunisia. For years, everything worked well. There were tourists, there was everything. And we didn't have any problems. We don't see another president like him.
Tunisia's revolution hasn't failed, but it isn't finished either. And until prosperity is shared more evenly, some people will continue to reminisce about the day of the regime. The feeling of hopelessness, that things haven't improved, has particular resonance with young people. In Kasserine recently, protesters calling for jobs fought with riot police. The demonstrations spreading to other towns and cities. A storm of stones and tear gas again playing out on the streets. In Sidi Bouzid, where the Arab Spring began, flames outside the governor's office, where Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire. A national curfew's been declared. The new protests, the biggest test to Tunisia's stability since the fall of Ben Ali.
There are many forces that want to destroy this model in our region, to end the last hope of a successful democracy in the Arab world and the Muslim world.
Tunisia has overcome a lot. But for many people, the fight for the revolution's ideals isn't over. Still, despite its difficulties, there is hope. Hope that the country will develop and become a successful democracy. Many don't count on the future getting any easier. But freedom is a prize they're not going to let go.
There has been much progress. Tunisia has held democratic elections, formed a coalition government. Compared to other countries in the region, it has been largely stable. But there is a growing frustration. The expectations raised by the revolution were always going to be impossible to fulfill, and the economic and security issues mean the gains of the revolution are vulnerable.
Outrage and the end of fear brought change to Tunisia. But while the West likes to present the country's revolution as a success story, the reality is far more complex. Many Tunisians are not ready to declare victory. For them, the revolution isn't over.